The white wind swept in along with the figure of an Apache woman. Her clothes were torn to shreds, her body bruised and battered, as if she had just escaped the grip of a predator. Her tangled black hair was matted with snow. Her lips were purple, and her breath came in short, broken gasps. She could no longer stand, only kneel on the doorstep, her deep black eyes drowning in despair. She tried to speak, her voice barely more than a final breath. "Please, let me stay the night." Evan did not ask a single question. He lifted her in his arms, feeling how her body was as cold as stone. He laid her down near the fireplace, removed her soaking wet coat, and handed her a dry outfit, along with the thickest blanket in the house. She changed behind the wooden curtain, her hands trembling. After a long moment, a hoarse voice broke the silence. "You.K. and come back in now." Evan stepped back into the room and saw more clearly the dark purple welts left by a whip, the deep wounds that had not yet healed, and the eyes of someone who had suffered far too much cruelty in this world. He did not know who she was, where she had come from, or why she had nearly died in the storm. But he knew one thing for certain. That night, if he had not opened the door, she would have died right there on his porch. And from that moment on, the quiet winters of Evan Crowley were never the same again. The fireplace crackled, its flickering flames casting shadows over the dark purple bruises on the shoulders and back of the Apache woman. She sat at the edge of the blanket, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if clinging to the little warmth slowly returning to her body. Evan placed a bowl of hot soup in front of her. "Eat. Your body needs the heat." The woman looked up at him, her gaze wary like a wild animal cornered. But the scent of the soup rose, warm and strangely comforting in the middle of a stormy night. She took the bowl with trembling hands and drank in small, cautious sips. After a long silence, she spoke in a hoarse voice, heavy like a stone falling into a deep well. "What is your name?" "Evan Crowley." She nodded slightly, then looked at him for a long time. In the firelight, her eyes were sharp like blades, but deep within, they flickered with a slow, lingering fear. "I heard people call you." She paused, weighing each word carefully. "The Virgin Farmer. Is that true?" Evan froze for a moment but did not look away. "It is." She set the bowl down, traced the wooden edge with her fingers, then suddenly placed her darkened hand on top of his. That hand was strong, but it trembled. "Then you are either the kindest man in all of Wyoming," her voice dropped lower, "or the most foolish." He did not argue. Outside, the storm howled like it wanted to swallow the entire world. But inside the small cabin, a strange and unexpected stillness began to feel warm. Evan asked softly, "What is your name?" "Shia," she replied. "Shia Blackbird." A beautiful name spoken with the weariness of someone who had lost everything. Shia took a deep breath, then began to speak. Each word seemed to slice through the air. "He, Ned Carver, wanted me to work as a saloon girl to pay off a debt. I said no. He beat me and gave me until Christmas Eve." She clutched the blanket tighter. "I ran away, but he will not let it go. He will tear apart the whole town to find me." Evan looked straight at her. "You are safe here." Shia gave a faint smile, caught somewhere between irony and despair. "Really? Out here in the West? Has anyone ever truly been safe?" Evan did not answer right away. He added more wood to the fire, letting the flames rise and light up the face of the Apache woman, who was holding on to the last thread of trust she had. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping, and inside this tiny wooden house, something was slowly, very slowly beginning to change. On the second night, the snowstorm still refused to let up. The wind slammed against the wooden walls, like hundreds of hands trying to tear the door down. Evan sat at the table, carving an old piece of wood to ease his restless mind. Shia lay on the rug near the fireplace, but she did not sleep. Every time the fire cracked, she flinched like someone who had spent too long being hunted. After a long silence, she spoke. "They say you have kept your promise to your mother for this long. That is strange." Evan set the knife down. "She wanted me to wait for a woman who was truly worthy. She said, 'Do not waste yourself on things that only leave you feeling empty.'" Shia stared into the fire, her voice soft but heavy with years. "You will know when breaking a promise is no longer a sin, but feels like breathing." Evan looked over. In the firelight, Shia no longer looked like a cornered Apache warrior, but a woman who had been wounded deeply, not just in flesh, but in ways no eyes could see. A moment later, she spoke again. As if confessing something she had kept buried for 4 years, I stopped feeling like anyone ever truly wanted me. Not since my husband died. And then Ned Carver tried to turn me into whatever it was he wanted. Evan moved a little closer. Shia, you are not something for anyone to do with as they please. She looked up, locking eyes with him. That gaze was fierce, yet deep inside, something still trembled. Then what am I? She asked. Evan took a slow breath. Someone I have not been able to look away from. Since the moment you knocked on my door, the air between them suddenly grew thicker, warmer, like the fire had just been fed a new flame. Shia clutched the blanket and whispered, "You make me forget all the vows I once tied myself to." Evan leaned in slightly, his voice low but steady. "You do not have to forget. Just let yourself breathe. Just once." Shia placed her hand on his chest lightly, but enough for Evan to feel his heart pounding like the storm outside. "Do not make me believe in things that cannot be. Then let me show you what can." Shia opened her mouth to say more, but stopped when the distant howl of a wolf echoed in the night. The moment of closeness was broken, but the warmth lingered, hanging between them like fireplace smoke. Outside, the storm still howled, but inside the small cabin, another storm was slowly changing course, touching a place in Shia she thought had long since died. That afternoon, the storm still had not passed, but the sky darkened faster than usual. Evan was chopping firewood behind the cabin when he heard the pounding of hooves on the snow. This was not the sound of travelers caught in bad weather. It was the sound of men riding with purpose. 2 figures on horseback emerged against the dull gray sky. As they drew closer, Evan recognized them instantly. Ned Carver, and another man whose face could strike fear into any native woman who had ever seen it. Ned dismounted and sneered. "Good evening, farmer. Heard you've been keeping something of mine." Evan stood up straight, his hand resting lightly near his belt, where his hunting knife hung. "You heard wrong. There's nothing here that belongs to you." The man beside Ned gave a crooked grin. "She's Apache. Out here, you catch one, you own her. Western law is real simple." Evan's expression did not change. "My law is different. She does not belong to anyone." Ned glanced toward the cabin door, his eyes lighting up with that familiar cruelty. "She ran from me last night. I came to take her back. You do not understand. Farmer, women like her fetch a lot of money." Evan stepped forward, his voice sharp as steel. "If you take one more step, you better have your name carved on a headstone." Both men froze. Ned squinted. "You willing to fight me over an Apache whore? You really think you will survive that?" Evan did not blink. "If she needs me to, I will." At that moment, the cabin door opened. Shia stood in the doorway, tall and strong. Though her body trembled slightly with fear she refused to show. Her eyes, for a brief second, turned to steel. "I do not belong to you." Her voice was hoarse but sharp as a blade. "I would rather die out in the snow than ever go back to you." Ned laughed loudly. "Well then, let's see if this farmer boy can keep you safe." He pulled a gun. In the span of a breath, Evan lunged forward and knocked the barrel off course with a fierce blow. The 2 men crashed into the snow, grappling in the howl of the wind. Ned was strong, but Evan was faster and tougher. A final punch slammed into Ned's jaw, dropping him face first into the snow. The other man reached for his weapon, but Evan was already aiming straight at him. "Go ahead. Try." The 2 of them climbed back onto their horses, backing away slowly while spitting out one last threat. "This ain't over, farmer." As the sound of hooves faded into the storm, Shia stood still in the doorway, her hand gripping the frame. Then she spoke slow and deep, like a vow carved into the cold air. "Evan, no one has ever stood up for me like that." Evan looked at her. No grand speeches, just a single nod, and both their lives were already moving in a new direction. "I am deeply grateful to have you here. And if this story brought back memories of dusty evenings and the echo of hooves pounding in your chest, subscribe to my channel, so every day we can sit together again, and I will tell you another story from the Wild West." The next morning, The storm had finally eased. A thin layer of snow still blanketed the valley, but the sky had cleared just enough to let through a rare sliver of light. Evan had just finished stacking the firewood on the porch when he saw Shia quietly gathering her things inside the cabin. A silent act, yet one that cut through him like a blade. "You planning to leave?" Evan asked, his voice dropping low. Shia clutched the coat he had lent her, her deep black eyes fixed on the wooden floor. "If I stay," her voice trembled softly, "they will call me a disgrace, an Apache widow staying in a man's home. The whole town will say I tried to seduce you." Evan stepped closer. "I do not care what they say." Shia shook her head, harder than she meant to. "But I care. They have called me every name there is. A fallen woman. Cheap. Native trash. I do not want them dragging you down with me." She turned away, but Evan gently took hold of her wrist, not to stop her, just to let her feel that he was still there. "Shia," he said softly, "you are not dragging me down. You are pulling me out of loneliness." She pressed her lips together. "You do not understand. A woman like me will only make your life harder. Everyone in Wyoming will say you married me because you had no other choice." Evan drew a deep breath and then, without a word, dropped to one knee. Shia gasped. What are you doing?" "Shia Blackbird," Evan said, placing his hand over his heart. "If the world needs to misunderstand, let them, but I will not let you walk out of this house with a heart more broken than when you came in." She shook her head, eyes filling with tears that refused to fall. "Evan, they will say you were forced to marry me. You will regret it." He held her hand tighter. "I have been afraid long enough. Afraid to love, afraid to be wrong, afraid of breaking my mother's promise. But now, I am not afraid anymore. Marry me, Shia." In that moment, Shia trembled not from the cold, but from a belief she thought she had lost forever. She placed her hand on his cheek, whispering the words he would remember for the rest of his life. "I was not wrong about you. You are a good man, and if you will have me, let your bloodline take root in me." Evan's throat tightened, his heart pounding like a hammer. "I want that, more than anything." Shia closed her eyes and released a long breath, one that carried a lifetime of running. Yes, one word. But it was enough to change the fate of 2 lives. Outside the door, the pale light of winter slipped in, as if offering a quiet blessing for the vow just born in that little cabin. Rumors travel faster than the wind in this valley. When Evan and Shia rode into the town of Red Creek to settle the debt Ned Carver had placed on her head, the entire main street fell silent. Townsfolk stood behind their windows, peeking out, while a few drunken men in the saloon spun around to stare as if witnessing something that defied all logic. Shia walked in first, tall and strong like an Apache pillar of stone, but her eyes gleamed with that familiar caution, the quiet defense of someone judged her entire life. Evan walked just behind her, his hand brushing the small of her back, steadying her. The saloon, once loud, dropped into silence. Ned Carver stood at the bar, his face draining of color when he saw them walk in together. He tried to regain his swagger. Well, look who it is. The runaway. And her poor farmer boy." Evan stepped forward and placed a bag of money on the counter. "This is for a debt she never owed. I am paying it to cut all ties with you." Ned sneered. "You think a few coins make it right?" "Her reputation." He did not finish. Shia stepped forward. The entire saloon fell dead silent as she stood tall in the middle of the room, her presence blocking the light from the windows behind her. Her voice rang out deep and steady like the mountain stone. "I am about to marry the best man I have ever known, and if that ruins my reputation, then maybe it was never worth anything to begin with." The room trembled. A man muttered under his breath, "She just said that? In front of Ned?" A shopkeeper's wife nodded quietly. "She did. Women that strong do not come around often." Evan looked at Shia, his eyes filled with pride not because she stood up for him, but because, for the first time, she stood up for herself. Ned flushed red, gripping his glass so tightly it nearly shattered. You think you've saved her, Evan? This town will never accept. Evan cut him off, his voice cold and calm. I do not need the town's approval. I only need hers. Shia turned to Evan. Her eyes held no fear, no weight of the past. Only choice, clear and firm. Evan stepped forward and took Shia's large hand in his, right there in the middle of the saloon. Anyone who wants to insult my wife will have to go through me first. No one spoke. Not even Ned, who stepped back without a word. The room shifted from mockery to silence, and then to a hesitant respect. The kind of respect neither Evan nor Shia had ever asked for, but somehow it came to them anyway. As they walked out of the saloon, snow began to fall gently, like a blessing from the sky above. Shia whispered, just loud enough for Evan to hear, "No one has ever stood up for me like that." Evan smiled, "And I will do it for the rest of my life." They left the town hand in hand, leaving behind the whispers, which no longer had the power to wound them. The wedding of Evan Crowley and Shia Blackbird took place on a pale gray afternoon, simple, just like their lives. There was no grand celebration, no violins or wedding cake, just an old preacher, 2 rough silver rings hand, forged by Evan, and vows exchanged beneath a snow-dusted porch. Shia wore her worn, traditional Apache attire. But standing beside Evan, she shone brighter than any jewelry ever could. When the preacher said, "You are now husband and wife," Evan took her hand, looked into those deep black eyes like bottomless wells, and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Shia answered with a small smile, a rare smile Evan had never seen on anyone else. But joy did not last long. The winter of 1887 struck like a starving beast. The biggest storm in years slammed into the Crowley ranch. Winds tore at the boards, snow buried the barn roofs, and the cattle began to die one by one of cold and exhaustion. Evan stayed awake 3 nights in a row trying to save the herd. He boarded up doors, stoked the fires, ran from barn to barn until he finally collapsed in front of the house. Shia pulled him up like lifting a fallen tree. "You cannot die here. Not now." She stood by his side, working just as hard as any man in the territory, hauling hot water, spreading hay, shielding the barns, even rebuilding a gate that had been ripped away by the wind. Evan looked at her and could not help but whisper, "You are strong." Shia smiled. "I have survived worse than a snowstorm." But no matter how hard they tried, they still lost nearly half the herd. Some townsfolk took the chance to whisper that Evan had married that kind of woman, and that was why misfortune had struck. Their cruel words no longer hurt Evan, but they lingered in Shia's heart. One night, when the storm had momentarily eased, she sat beside him by the fire and said, "You pulled me out of my old life, so I could pull you out of loneliness. From now on, I will stand beside you through every storm." Evan turned to her. The firelight reflected in her eyes like 2 glowing coals, strong, warm, and loyal. "I know," Evan said. "I knew it the night you knocked on my door." And so they leaned into each other. In the harshest winter Wyoming had seen in years. But it was also the winter that turned 2 lonely souls into a true family. Outside, the wind still howled, and the snow was white enough to erase the world. But inside the Crowley cabin, 2 hearts burned warm enough to make the storm retreat. The summer of 1910 arrived in Wyoming with a peace so quiet, it was almost hard to believe. No more howling winds. No more white storms swallowing the sky. On the hillside of the Crowley ranch, the old wooden cabin had grown into a warm, welcoming homestead, surrounded by green fields and the laughter of grown children who now lived far away, visiting only from time to time. On the front porch, a gray-haired man sat in an old wooden chair, his once calloused hands now trembling gently with the rhythm of age. Evan Crowley, the farmer once mocked by the town as the virgin farmer, gazed out over the Golden Valley, the place he had lived, had loved, and had waited. The door creaked open behind him. "Evan," came Shia's voice, still deep and warm like the first time he heard it through the snowstorm. Only softer now, like a summer forest. Though past 60, her tall Apache frame still carried that quiet dignity, each step as steady as the day she stood by him in the storm. She placed her hand on his shoulder. It no longer held a warrior's strength, but carried a tenderness, meant only for the one man she had stood beside for 23 years. Evan took her hand, gently pulling her down to sit beside him. "Do you remember the night you knocked on my door?" he asked, smiling through the gravel of age in his voice. "I thought that was the worst storm I would ever see." Shia chuckled softly. "But it turns out, the one inside your heart was even stronger." Evan nodded, eyes wandering toward the faint purple mountains in the distance. "I once thought I would live out my days alone. I held on to my mother's promise so long. I forgot my heart was even allowed to open." He turned to look at her, his old eyes still shining with a light that defied time. "My only regret is that I waited so long to love you. Everything else. Not one single day of it do I regret." Shia placed her large hand on his cheek, the same hand that once shielded him from the winter winds inside a freezing barn. "Evan," she whispered, "you were not late. You came at the right time, when I still had just enough strength left to love and to be loved." The summer wind swept through the porch, carrying the scent of wood, fresh grass, and the distant laughter of their grandchildren playing in the yard. Two people once cast into loneliness by life had walked through 23 years together, not perfect, not wealthy, but whole in a way only those who have known deep loss can understand. Evan leaned his head on Shia's shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for knocking on my door, the night I needed you most." And there, on the vast high plains beneath the golden sunset, their story did not end but closed with a gentle reminder. When love finds the right person, it is never too late. My friend, love when it is true can weather even the harshest blizzard life can throw at us. It does not need to be loud. It does not need to be grand. It only needs two hands, reaching for each other at the right moment, two hearts brave enough to open after all the fear. True love is not about finding someone perfect, but finding someone who makes you feel safe enough to move past old wounds, strong enough to stand with you against the world. And when two souls choose each other, no winter can ever come between them. Above all, I just hope you are loved and cherished wherever you are. Whatever your story may be, I love you, dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Tell me how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type the number 3 if you liked this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West.